we've collected a series of clips of the mainstream media, some from today after the 2020 election and others from back in 2006 when Democrats and the left-wing media actually claimed that voting fraud was a national security issue. See for yourselves.
Dominion has absolutely no corporate ties with George Soros or Venezuela. But that's not stopping Trump campaign attorney Sidney Powell from making the wild and totally unfounded claim that Dominion is somehow tied to Hugo Chavez.
The U.S. company that makes the machines, Sequoia, was bought in 2005 by Smartmatic, a private company primarily owned by Venezuelan businessmen.
It's an obvious play from, dirty politics 101.
I mean, Hugo Chavez, really? That's what we're going to talk about?
That's right.
That was the most ridiculous statement. That we were in the realm of ridiculousness there.
When Chicago had problems with the machines, a dozen Venezuelan employees were there to help with the election. Chicago officials are outraged.
I think that American elections ought to be run by American companies and ought to be run by American citizens, not Venezuelan nationals.
It's frankly, it's just crazy stuff, tinfoil hat stuff. But the idea is that because of the software, somebody is able to go in and change the results. If somebody even wanted to do that, could they do that?
You really can't miss it. The yellow button at the back of the Sequoia voting machine. Tens of thousands of machines used in 16 states and Washington, D.C. That button puts the machine in manual mode, so anyone can vote and repeatedly cast as many votes as they want.
A company that has close ties with Venezuela and therefore China?
False. Truth, facts, they don't seem to matter to Giuliani.
Fewer than a dozen Smartmatic employees work in Florida. The majority of the workers are based in Venezuela. Watchdog groups question why U.S. voting machines would be under the control of citizens of another country, especially a country whose own election process is highly suspect.
We believe this is a national security issue. There is no way that companies belonging to non-U.S. corporations should have access to our elections.
When you hear the president, and I want to put your politics completely out of this for a second, but I will bring it up in a moment for one reason. But poll workers in Michigan duplicating ballots, jumping in front to block results. What do you even say to that?
I worry about the poll captains having access. They're temporary workers. In many cases, there aren't background checks done on them, and it's easy for them to go back there, make those changes, and vote repeatedly and not be noticed.
We talk a lot about the hypocrisy of the mainstream media, how their story changes day to day depending on what narrative they're trying to sell. Sometimes they switch so fast you can't keep up, and then move on as quick as possible, hoping that no one will notice. Well, we notice. And when we do, we here at One America News like to share with you, the American people, what we've found. Sometimes we have to work hard to bring you examples of the mainstream media's hypocrisy. And then there are those other times when they do all the work for you. What we're about to show you is an exclusive report by CNN from back in 2017, after President Trump was just elected. And you might notice back then they had quite a different take on voting fraud. Take a look.
We're loving this one, but most people probably wouldn't.
A room full of hackers, all trying to hack into voting machines.
You can possibly make it accept a fake card or accept any card, so you could add your own votes.
These are supposed to be the latest machines. They're still used in elections, and they're running ancient software. I think that, if somebody wanted to, it would be pretty easy to fake an election.
Less than a couple hours with access, and they're already figuring out ways to break in and play pranks. But it gets more serious.
So you could leave the security key into it and still inject.
I feel like I'm the only one here that hasn't found a vulnerability. It's not what you think. They've all been invited here to demonstrate just how vulnerable the tech we rely on for our elections can be. The experiment is the brainchild of Jake Braun. He's a former security advisor for the Obama administration.
With everything that happened in 16, what we're trying to do is get this industry to mature from a cybersecurity perspective, so you don't have folks saying what they are now, which is things like machines are unhackable or databases are air-gapped and can't be changed.
It's not clear if any actual machines were infiltrated in the 2016 election, and no one has suggested any physical votes were changed. But intelligence officials agreed that Russia was able to meddle with other election-related systems. This inspired Braun and the organizers of this year's DEF CON hacking conference to collect over 30 pieces of voting-related equipment, including voting machines and a mock elections office, and tell a group of hackers to try any means necessary to break into and reverse engineer them. And it didn't take long. Several were compromised within the first hour and a half.
So if you're a voter in America, we're likely hacking a machine that you vote on. There's a few dozen of these machines and also electronic poll books. In some states, people check in on an electronic device as opposed to a paper book.
How you cast your vote varies from district to district. Some places use this machine, some places use that one. Some counties only vote on paper ballots, but almost all of these machines are still in use somewhere in the United States. Some of the hacks might not work if your district has updated the software on the machines, although many don't.
We can go in and hack this lock within 10 seconds. You gain access to the operating system. We could actually remove this and clone this particular USB. We could go back and start looking at and reverse engineering what's on this image and determining the various ways that we can impact this particular operating system.
When people are going after machines,
You guys, no one will believe you?
if they see XP, they're very happy.
Good Lord, did he just say good Lord? I like that every time it reboots to Windows XP, you hear people groaning behind us. The machines you use to cast your vote aren't the only point of entry for attackers. Other election-related systems, like campaign networks and registration databases, are also at risk.
The vulnerabilities at the voting machine level are very localized, and what we're trying to simulate out here is the entire back-end network.
There's a lot of mischief these guys can do without ever actually having to physically get access to a machine. If they were just to go in and mess up the voter file, you could have millions of people showing up at the wrong precinct or showing up at the right precinct, but the name's wrong in the poll book, and then all of a sudden, now they don't know where they need to go.
Intelligence officials have stated that Russia was able to influence the election without the need to penetrate actual voting machines by breaching DNC computers, accessing staffer emails and opposition research. The Department of Homeland Security also found that they targeted election-related systems in as many as 21 states.
If you wanted to go in and specifically manipulate vote counts on every single machine in America, that'd be really hard to do.
Right.
But you don't need to do that to have an impact on the election in 18 either. You don't only have to flip a couple Senate seats to have an impact on U.S. Congress.
If it can be done, there's a chance it's already being done.
If a nation state, a criminal organization, if they would start doing this, they would have stolen databases, they would have stolen machines, they would have manuals, they would have studied.
Right.
They have started with nothing a few hours ago. The uphill battle they have fought to get where they are is incomprehensibly more difficult than what real criminal would need to do.
Do you think that nation states, real criminals, already have an idea of some of the vulnerabilities that are being discovered today?
Absolutely. It's all documented. It's in public documents.
Right.
It's not hiding anywhere. You can go actually to Secretary of State websites and download and learn hundreds and hundreds of vulnerabilities.
By the end of the weekend, all of the available machines had been hacked successfully, including an electronic poll book system that still contained the personal data of over 650,000 Tennessee voters in Shelby County, information that hadn't been properly wiped before the machines were resold. The county's administrator of elections told CNN Tech that they are looking into the incident, and that as far as they're aware, the information exposed on the poll book is already publicly available through a request to the Board of Elections. When reached for comment, manufacturer Election Systems and Software told CNN Tech, unrestricted access to a voting unit in an uncontrolled environment is not a legitimate test. We've extended an invitation to the organizers of DEF CON, inviting them to visit our home office, meet our developers, and engage in a collaborative discussion regarding voting system security. To date, we have not received a response. Dominion Voting Systems did not respond to our request for comment. The plan is to eventually present the event's findings to Congress.
What the election industry needs to do is start working together with our national security agencies to share threat information, understand when the bad guys get in, and then get them out when they do. If we don't get our act together quickly, this could be one of the biggest threats to American democracy in our history.
Do you believe that right now we are in a position where the 2020 election will be hacked?
Oh, without question. I mean, the 2020 election will be hacked no matter what we do, even if we're as more successful than I even think we could be in securing our elections. The question is, will we be able to identify the attacks before they can have an impact on the election through things like audits of vote counts? And can we get the bad guys out before they can do something bad?
I know what you're thinking. CNN actually told the truth. Well, we here at OAN would like to commend CNN for their outstanding work exposing just how serious a threat voting fraud really is. I should also point out that this is exactly the kind of report that One American News is being censored for on sites like YouTube. Talking about voting fraud is forbidden unless you're a member of the left-wing media and you're trying to prove that President Trump stole the election. Then it's fine. The bottom line is this. This is just another reminder that the news you're getting from the mainstream media isn't news. It's narrative. And you challenge it at your own risk. This is why the mainstream media can't be trusted, and why, if you're listening to them, you're intentionally being misled. So quickly, let's do a tally of the mainstream media's hypocrisy on voting fraud. Today they're telling us that our voting machines have no ties with Venezuela. But just a few years ago, these same people said our voting machines were, quote, bought by Smartmatic, which is primarily owned by Venezuelan businessmen. Today, it's in the realm of ridiculousness to say that Hugo Chavez could ever have anything to do with our voting machines. But jump back again, and they literally said these are the same machines used by Hugo Chavez in his elections. Now, the mainstream media says, quote, it's a tinfoil hat theory for someone to believe that it's possible to change the results of an election. And once again, barely a decade ago, they told us that by just pressing a button on the back of the machines, literally anyone could vote as many times as they wanted. Now, they call this a conspiracy theory, but back then, they called it a national security issue. This is a 2016 headline straight from leftist news rag Politico called How to Hack an Election in 7 Minutes, which they say is nothing more than child's play. And then here's a headline from today calling voting fraud a crazy and confoundingly successful conspiracy theory. Obviously, they don't read their own headlines. It should be clear by now that the mainstream media has no intention of telling you the truth and just want to convince you of their version of events. However, One American News believes the American people have a right to know what's happening. But the only problem is every time we do, we get fact-checked by people with alternative facts. That doesn't matter. This is too important to give up on because the fate of an election and an entire country hangs in the balance. For One American News, I'm Pearson Sharp.
We've heard it at congressional hearings for years.
Our voting machines are not connected to the internet.
Those are not connected. Voting machines themselves are not connected to the internet.
And we knew that wasn't true.
And cybersecurity expert Kevin Skoglund wanted to prove it. So he and 9 other independent security consultants created their own search engine looking for election systems online.
We found over 35 had been left online, and we're still continuing to find more.
Voting machines themselves are not designed to be online. So how are some voting systems getting online? We got a first-hand look when we visited ES&S, the largest manufacturer of voting machines, and talked to CEO Tom Burt.
Okay, why is there a Sprint thing here and a Verizon thing here?
There's a small percentage of jurisdictions in the country, a lot of them are in Florida, who have decided that they want to modem unofficial results to the election office.
You know, you do wonder sometimes whether or not our thirst for quick results sometimes may be interfering with our thirst for accurate results.
You know, Cynthia, that's not my place to judge that one. Again, these jurisdictions have a need for that.
ES&S insists while there are 14,000 of its modems in use, there are firewalls separating those modems from the public internet, and that the modems are turned on for just seconds. But Skoglund says that's not enough.
We're seeing Illinois and Michigan.
Last summer, Skoglund's team found ES&S voting systems online in at least some of the precincts in 11 states, including the battleground states of Florida, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
If you were able to get inside these systems, could you do more than perhaps mess up the preliminary results? Could you actually get deeper inside the system?
Absolutely, and that's my biggest concern.
Top computer scientist Andrew Appel agrees with Skoglund.
Once a hacker starts talking to the voting machine through the modem, they can hack the software in the voting machine and make it cheat in future elections.
In August, Skoglund took his results to election officials and the press, assuming the systems will get taken down. We were astonished when he showed us some of those systems are still online.
Modems in voting machines are a bad idea. Those modems are network connections, and that leaves them vulnerable to hacking by anybody who can connect to that network.
We should make sure that voting machines are not connected to the internet.
Period.
Period.
The good news, Lester, experts told us most of the country votes with paper and pencil. Those ballots counted by scanners without modems. That means audits and recounts are possible. Now, having said that, they urge jurisdictions using modems and touchscreens to get rid of them.
DEF CON is an annual hacker conference, and in my world, conferences tend to be these sort of big sponsored events with elaborate advertisements everywhere. But DEF CON is very unique in that everybody who attends, including press, pays $300 cash to attend. There are no sponsors. It is a fiercely independent spirit on display there. We were there specifically to attend something called the Voting Village, which is something that's gone on for 3 years, and in this, its third year, they had assembled some of the most common voting machines in the country, both systems that are on the front end that you and I use to actually register our vote, and the back end, tabulators and so forth, that you would feed a paper ballot into or that oversee a system. What was so interesting was I assumed coming into it that the big manufacturers, companies like ES&S and Dominion, had provided these machines to the hackers to, field test them. But no, it turns out there's an extremely hostile relationship there, and that ES&S and Dominion and other companies have basically said we don't want to participate, and really have been quite aggressive in saying we don't want to be part of this. So the organizers were reduced to finding these machines on eBay, which right there is pretty terrifying, because it turns out that anybody can buy some of the most common machines in use on eBay. What was really alarming was when you see these hackers, and these are people who've never seen these machines before, have had no practice on them for the most part, come in and engage them, they immediately get into the guts of them. Beyond that, we were seeing Dominion's image cast system. It's a line of tabulators that paper ballots are fed into. That had its guts all over the room. It was not clear to us whether this was the most recent version of the image cast hardware, but it's important to note that Georgia just spent over is about to spend over $100 million on a contract with Dominion to provide image cast hardware to the state in time for the next primaries and for the 2020 election. And yet here these kids were who had opened it up. They said, look, you can pop the front off of it, and here's a port you can get into right here. That's easy. All kinds of stuff that you could certainly do within 6 minutes behind a curtain, much less if you had extra time, because any of these were connected to the web, as we discovered a couple of days before. The front of each machine was a little post-it that showed off what had been found out by the various hackers. So at one point, the admin password was just sitting there on there, because it turns out that the same admin password, it applies to multiple machines across the room. And those machines were created in the 2000s, which means that they were in fact created so you can't change that admin password. They're just locked for all time in that way. There does not seem to be any political momentum on some of the bills that are under consideration right now around trying to keep these machines off the internet, or trying to establish some sort of certifiable paper ballot system, or any of the other things that have been proposed. And so the combination of seeing the incredible vulnerabilities that we saw on display in real time at this event and the lack of institutional action around the security of the vote, all of that made for an extremely alarming weekend.